Can we turn that light out or not?
If we do, we don't get very good photos.
Okay. No, I was just thinking that one. I just didn't know whether you could turn one bar out, but or not.
Is this new? Is that new? Is that new?
No.
Can you turn off the LED strip? Oh, that's fine. Yes. Is that good for photos? Yeah. Yeah. We're good. Right. I don't think I've ever noticed that. Anyway. Right. So, hello. Nice small group tonight. So we can kind of spread out a bit tonight, which is quite nice. We've decided to put a little bit of a raffle on. It does look like everyone might get a prize tonight. Thank you to Neil for bringing some more stuff as well, so appreciate that. Just want to give a quick shout out to Elliot and Elliot's business, Tree Funk, who are now sponsoring the meetup. So thank you ever so much. Really appreciate it. So my bank account's going to look so much better. so we appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you to Code Weavers, Matt, everyone for your help and supporting us as well. Even if we couldn't get through the door tonight. We thought we'd send something and they moved us out. But no, we're all good. We're here. So we've got Fiona tonight.
Yes.
Are you all ready to go?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm a bit iffy because I've had dental work, and it's still numb. So if I start dribbling, tell me, because I completely unfeel the side of my face. So yeah, right. Just if I do, I'm sorry.
I'll come with you a bit of tissue.
Yeah.
Right, I'll hand over.
Basically, I wanted to kind of go use the platform. I've kind of set the scene into what it got. I mean, looking back in time. Kind of the web was pretty slow. The web didn't do what you wanted it to do. It didn't do mobile app stuff. It didn't do stuff in the app store. It had to be online. And it was a real pain to develop. And due to browsers changing, devices changing, and everything not being updated very quickly, as far as browsers were concerned. And to do anything, I've called it special, but basically to do most kind of stuff that you do on either a mobile app or a desktop app or anything along those lines, kind of took frameworks or libraries or extra little fixes that were a real pain in the neck to be able to do. Usually one person found a way of doing it and everybody copied the same sort of way of doing it. And it really was avoid the platform rather than use the platform onto what you've got. And it was very much on mobile a push towards, oh, well, you can't do any of this stuff with the web. You've got to do a native app, and you've got to do all that stuff. And I still hear that. I still hear the web is slow and it needs to be online and it needs to have all that. So what I wanted to kind of do is kind of some of the little bits and pieces that have appeared. Now I've got too much in here, so I hopefully we'll get through some of it. And I've got some demos and bits and pieces that are not very pretty. But I can hopefully show you some bits and pieces and some guides to where to go, because things are changing, and I want to show you some of the stuff that you may or may not be aware of. Some of which you should be aware of, but some of which hopefully you won't be, and it will be new and you go, oh, I'll try that. So it's mostly CSS stuff with a little bit of HTML stuff and a little bit about the new web manifest, and the end stuff is JS stuff that I'm not probably going to get a chance to demo or to go through, but some of the things. And I'm going to say, warning, this won't be pretty. I always say when I'm doing demos at work, it's very much a colour it bad, because if you colour it bad, you can see it happening, or you do something there, you can see it doing something. So I do tend to colour it bad. So my design is not good. The way I do it is not particularly the best way of doing it design-wise, definitely. But hopefully you'll see it visually, what the effects are and things are, and we can go through some bits to go through. One thing to point out is the standards are now living. Whereas they were clunky and kind of changed very, very slowly, they are now live standards, as close to open source as you can get without being open source. Anybody can contribute to them. Anybody can make comments on them, but they're not quite open source fully, and they're not quite kind of in that way, but they are pretty close. and are managed now by WhatWG for the kind of HTML, JavaScript type side of web API side of things, and still kind of sort of managed by W3 for the CSS. But they are changing rapidly, and things change quite frequently to where we don't have any more kind of HTML5 or CSS3 or anything. It's kind of alive, so it changes practically every day as far as the WhatWG stuff is concerned, and it changes quite frequently as far as the CSS is concerned. Some of the parts of CSS are up to level 6 now, with level 7 muted in some areas and things that are going, so it changes quite frequently. But they're the kind of places to go for kind of real standards to what we've got. The browsers are evergreen, whereas browsers used to update every year, practically. It was never much of an update. They are updated frequently. Most of the major browsers are updated as major versions every month, Safari being the exception, but even that has minor versions practically every month. So they're updated as much. So they are incredibly frequently. And in Google I/O 2024, 21% of developers said they had issues keeping up with new features and knowing what was supported by browsers and knowing where things were. And that was one of the biggest pain points for developers, was making sure they could actually do something. And 19% still said it was hard to make a design work across browsers, which is a bit sad, really, because it's much better now than it kind of was then. But Google I/O 2024 probably did the survey end of 2023 type standard, kind of in that kind of region to do things. So it's still a pain point and still things in there. So Google and friends basically came up with the idea of baseline. Well, interop, which I'm going to talk about, was one of the first things they came up with, but baseline was the idea of going, okay, we can't say this works in version Chrome 8.3.2 or whatever, because it changes so frequently. You're not really sure when it was updated, when that version of the browser was out, when things were there. So it's very tricky from a development point of view of doing it. So what they came up with drawing this new line in the sand and going, okay, we're going to say, if it's supported by the major browsers, then basically we can use it today and we don't need to think about it, and we'll come up with this idea of baseline. And originally they were going to do a baseline quite less frequently, but it seems to now be going to a baseline every month, to kind of going what are in baseline and how things do. Can I use will also tell you, I don't know, but I'm assuming most people know Can I use is where you go and look at whether things are supported by different browsers. They will also tell you whether a particular feature is supported in baseline as well. So what baseline really means is looking at those 4 major browsers in different things. So basically Chrome across desktop and Android, Edge across desktop, Firefox desktop and Android, Safari, macOS and iOS. Browsers as well, in most situations, browsers are automatically updated. So you don't have the same problems you've got. Now I know that's different in organisations. And it can be a real pain in the neck when an organisation is homed down into doing something. But as far as home users are concerned, and kind of most kind of dynamic organisations, ones that do allow you to update, these will be updated automatically as they go through to the latest version. So things that should work, it's got three different levels of baseline. You've got limited availability, which basically goes, it's not across all browsers yet, but it's starting to be there. So you do need to be careful about all your users when you're using something that's at limited availability. You'll get the nice yellow cross. You can't quite see the orange bit, the grey bit on that. They're all diamonds, but that one doesn't show up as well on the screen. That's limited availability. Newly available is basically it is supported by all browsers and therefore is interoperable and you can use it across anything. But you still need to be careful, because if their browser versions a version back or so, then basically you've got more than 2 versions back, then they won't have support. So you still should, when you're developing something in that way, do the extra stuff that matters to make it interoperable. Widely available, 30 months has passed since it's become under baseline. So As it's got to 30 months, basically, fine. Everything should support it. You can just use it and everything is wonderful. So what you're kind of looking for is try to use mainly the stuff that's in the green baseline, the widely available one, and go to the others if need be, but be aware of things. There is a whole section, and they do a blog on baseline, so every month they're doing a what's new in baseline type thing, so it's worth keeping an eye on to see what new things are added to the list. And it's quite surprising that some things are only added to the list relatively recently. You think, well, I've been using that for 2 years, but now it's only just in a situation where it's kind of widely available and kind of in that setup. So interop is the other side. That's kind of looking backwards with baseline. That's what is supported. Interop is what the browsers have agreed to look at in the next year. So this started back in 2019, and they came up with a list of things. And again, there was things in there I was thinking, I thought that was widely supported. But it's not just a case of being widely supported, it's also a case of being widely supported in the same way. So everything has to be the same, and it has to conform exactly to the standards and specification. They've got quite a big test hub for this. It's quite interesting to see the different tests that have passed and failed when you look at kind of the status, and you can drill down into the particular things that are there. And it does, what they decide is at the beginning of the year, they look and go, what's the particular pain points of developers now? And we're going to have a list of things that we're going to look at over this year to make sure that actually by the end of the year, 100% of this should be working across all those major browsers. So all of them are committed to this. So, as I say, Microsoft, Apple, Google and Firefox, they're all committed to doing this, and they're all committed to these sort of things. This is 2025's list. So some things you kind of go, yeah, I can figure some of those are new. I was quite surprised that WebAssembly wasn't yet fully supported across everything, but it's hopefully by the end of the year will be. But there's also some other stuff that basically, WebRTC surprised me because I assumed that was supported, and it isn't fully, mostly Apple. Apple seem to be the ones that are the new kind of bug to what we're going. The dashboard's really good. I'll flick into it so you can see. The dashboard shows you all the particular things that are there, whether they're in baseline, so whether they've actually been added and fully comported or not. And there are you can see there's 43 pages of that, and it shows you what sort of things and what sort of support there are for particular things. So the dashboard's useful for looking at what interop and baseline are affected, so you can see what kind of support you've got. So that kind of helps in that environment and going through. So it's, again, worth keeping an eye on because it basically fits in there. So some of the things that have kind of some things that have been around a while in CSS, but basically things that are there. What's happening with CSS is the same that's happened to the JavaScript APIs. Now, I will elaborate a little bit on that because not everybody knows what happened and where things fit. I do not know how many years ago now. We must be talking 10, 50, close to 15 years ago, probably about that kind of time. No, let's go a little less because the iPhone only came out in 2009. Probably about 2013-ish, kind of that kind of era. PhoneGap kind of came out. And the idea of PhoneGap, it was a library to plug the gap between HTML and what HTML and JavaScript could do and what native apps could do. So it was a library that was added on to anything that was HTML and CSS and JavaScript so that it could do all the extra stuff. And their mantra, originally it was open source, and their mantra in the first place was this list of things that this PhoneGap can do, I don't want to exist in 5 years' time. I want it to be in the standards and what's there. They then got taken over by Adobe and got sold. And that kind of went a bit quiet because they made money out of it and the people who were originally disappeared. But that list was there. And they did write to the standards people at the time and go, look, there's this list of stuff that it basically should do. And basically what's happened with quite a lot of the web APIs is a lot of that list has been ticked off. So things that you couldn't do then, you can do now. In fact, there's very little that you can't do on the web that you can do in a native app. and very little that is not native to the platform to what's there. Now, what's happened with CSS is they're doing the same sort of stuff with preprocessors and kind of going, okay, we should be able to do all this stuff that preprocessors were brought in to do because it makes developers' lives easier, but we're going to do it better, faster, easier, more dry, more flexible. And at the same time, we're going to add some of the cool stuff in that people want as well. So we're going to add extra stuff that people wanted it. A lot of the things that are happening with CSS kind of fix themselves around mobile and interaction and the way people interact with stuff now, and kind of fit around that particular area, but also fit for making developers' life easier and simple to do. Now, every year there is a survey. There are several surveys. There is the state of JavaScript was the first one. There is a state of HTML and there's a state of CSS. I use it as a nice kind of way of looking about what I should know about, what's new and shiny, and what things are there. And the nice new feature they've done on this from last year is that when you actually fill in the survey, you can tick a box that says interested, and then they email you loads of nice links about this stuff you're interested in, so you can actually go and read more stuff about them. So I use it more for that when I'm answering it, as also to get kind of ideas. The results of this one will be out, should be out pretty soon. They closed the survey basically last in December 2024, but they haven't yet released the results, but that's nothing unusual for them. They do take a bit of time to come up with the results and things. So when the results come out, it'll be interesting to see what kind of level of interest there is on all sorts of stuff. But it's worth subscribing to it to actually get the survey and do the survey, because again, you can see all the cool stuff that comes out with it. Now these three you basically should know. This is not new. Although it's quite amazing, still I see articles that go, you need to position things using this way. Are we being recorded? I won't say something. I didn't check before. We're going live, I suppose, yeah. No, it's fine. We can have a conversation now afterwards. But these sort of things you should know about and know what sort of things are there. So I'm not going to talk a lot about those in details. This one also probably I'm assuming most people know about CSS variables. This is one of the first things they did from preprocessors, and everybody uses variables in preprocessors, and you kind of go, well, okay, let's use it. So let's set up some variables, quite often for colour, but can be for anything, to basically set, and you can set up the variables using that sort of way, and you can use the variables in that sort of way. My demo at the end has got loads of these, so but I want to kind of talk about the topics and try and get through those kind of in there. And it just makes it easier because you can change it in one space rather than having to change it in lots of different spaces and things. So it logically makes life easier for a developer to do this. For those who are programmers and want to do some more stuff with it, we can now strongly type these with property. So if you do need to strongly type them for any particular reason, we can say that a particular CSS variable is colour. It does, whether it inherits or not from the parent and what it does, and its initial value, so you can initialize it and set it. This is moving much more into the idea that CSS is going to become much more of a programmy type language than potentially it is now. So moving more into the kind of things in there. So it's there, you can do it. I'm not quite sure why you do it at the moment, but there's bound to be reasons why from the programming point of view. Something else that might pass you by is box sizing. We can. Typical box model, just in case you're not aware, you have the content. I have to keep remembering which order this is now. You have the content, you have the padding, you have the border, you have the margin. And the typical old style box model would add those up together, and it meant that if you did put any padding or border or margin in, it blows the boxes from where you've got. So it makes them a kind of fit, not fit. Actually, I will pull up my cafe page. Not my cafe page. On there. So if you don't have box sizing on, that kind of thing is what happens. I told you it'd colour it bad. The first box has got some padding on there. This has got margin and padding on. And you can see it kind of blows the size of the box that's outside it, so it becomes too big for the space you've got. If you add box sizing onto that kind of first example, now remembering which of my CSSs this is. So if I take in my box sizing and take in my width to what I've got in there, so making my box sizing border box, making, let's do a Control plus so that we are a bit bigger on here, making the calculation take away 2 rem, so I take away the margin in there. Most calc can actually do maths on things that are not the same. So I've got 2 rem and 100% and it can do maths, and it's clever. And it does things like that. So now if you can see I don't blow the boxes in there. So basically it means you can box size things so much easier than trying to work it out manually and figure out what's there, and everything fits quite nicely. So making it that much easier to do stuff in there. I put outline on here, but I've also put outline on the next page. So basically, we can also do some clever stuff now with form styling. So we can do, so we can have not only just a border around something, we can have an outline something on, which is very useful if you're focused on something. You can have an outline with a focus. You can also do user invalid rather than just invalid. So if you've got a box that you have as a required field, what it will tend to do if you just do invalid, when you first get there, it'll tell you there's an error. So it will basically go in a case and go, that's a problem. Whereas if you change that to user invalid instead of invalid, it will only do it after the user's actually put some input into it. So in other words, if the user's input is invalid rather than the box being invalid by the HTML rules that are there, which is a much better user experience, because if you hit a form and it goes, no, this is wrong, and you're like, no, it's not. I haven't even started typing yet. So basically that will give you some indication on there and kind of have that. So it quite nicely works from there. I'll do that one here. Let me just change my display settings. So that's a nice little newbie that kind of fits into the kind of it in there. Subgrid. Yeah. Being picky as I am, I would hate that. My demo's got a nice little example with things like this, and it kind of having the level of the buttons in the wrong place. And I like looking at it and going, no, I want them in the same place. And it was a nightmare, and you had to do all little fixes and everything. Subgrid kind of does solve this and line everything up beautifully. And it's relatively easy to do. Again, as I say, I will go through some bits of code and my demo in there. Container queries. We've been able to do media queries, so we've been able to change the size of a page depending on the size of the actual window quite easily with media queries. But that doesn't always help, because you might want to change the content of the page depending on the container it's in. So if you've got two things that are generally next to each other, but they are potentially laid out differently, one's got an image, one hasn't got an image, say, and you want to kind of go, okay, when I get bigger than a certain width, when I've got a widescreen, I want to put this side by side rather than underneath each other. So container queries will look at the size of the actual container. So look at the size of that actual thing rather than look at the size of the page and then kind of trying to proportion it inwards, which again makes life a lot easier with trying to design things, because you haven't got to think about the whole page and think about how does it fit. Okay, I want to do it this size, and I've got to take away this standard container that's there. And it just makes life easier to actually just go, okay, I've got a flex box with two things in, and I'm going to container style it, use the container query to do the bit that's after. We can add an extra little bit on container queries. So we can actually change the style of something based on a style feature of that container to go with particular things. This was lovingly stolen from there, and basically is a weather card that changes the colours from to yellow when it's sunny, and basically changes it to a different colour when it's a different setting, and then puts a particular image in depending on what it is, and sets the background colour depending on what it is, and all this particular thing, so it kind of matches the weather and the way you example. So you can do more with container queries than just the size of something in it. I put that one in. It's been around for a bit, but it's kind of under the radar, been around. So Pinterest type layout was always a bit of a pig to do. I mean, you can do it with a grid, but it's not very dynamic, and it's not easily changeable with if you've got a load of images coming in that are different sizes, and trying to then figure out what you do with a load of images. And you can now do grid template loads as masonry, and so basically it's Pinterest format. It's like bricks in a kind of masonry setup, and it will automatically change the style depending on the size of the images you've got, and bring things in to fit across. So it just means that it does it dynamically. If you're bringing in a load of images and you don't know what sizes they are and they're coming from a dynamic source, it will just do it for you. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to go through a setting in there. So it's nice in that way. Some of the nice new things are coming up. So again, programming. We try to move CSS into a programming world. One of them is has. Has will check styles. Let me pull up my has CSS because it's easier to see. So, in the case of a card I've got on here, I have a figure plus dot content. So if I have a dot content in there, in my figure, I will display it as a grid. So I'm looking for a particular thing. So in my has HTML, I have basically a figure and a dot content in that first one, but in that second card I've only got a dot content. So if it's looking for both these things, it's going to style the one with the picture as a grid, but not style that one as a grid because it hasn't got the figure in it. So it kind of looks like that. So that's styled as a grid, and that's styled not as a grid. So it basically does to see whether something's in there, and if both things are in there, it'll style it in one way, and if one thing's in there, it styles it in a different way. So it just means that easier to style, simpler enough in that. There's also which isn't fully supported yet, so hence why I haven't done a demo with this, but it's one of the things that is looking like it's going to be there, and kind of go, it's equivalent to doing all that in just that one line. So you're basically going section H1, section H2, section H3, section H4, etc. Then article H1, article H2, article H3. So you're basically saying, is it any of that combination? So instead of writing every single thing out at the bottom, you can just write the one line. So that's one thing that's on the horizon again. Slightly, I mean, I say maybe soon because it keeps appearing and disappearing and appearing and disappearing. But this is one thing that preprocessors do that we kind of need this to do, and it's one of the ones that keeps going in different formats to what we've got. And it's an extension to support, so if you say, you can have a CSS tag that says if you support a particular feature, style it in this particular way or do this particular thing to it. This is the same sort of thing. They're going to go for when else. They're not going for if else. The kind of standard idea is they're going for when else. Don't know why. Everywhere else they've copied what preprocessor's done roughly. For this one they're going when else. But basically the whole idea of this is it's going to format it kind of like that. So when the media width is this and it supports subgrid, do it that way. Else, do it some other way. So it's a simpler way of doing a supports. You don't have to override. You've actually got two alternatives. which makes perfect sense to go, if your browser supports this, or you're a certain size of screen, do it this way, otherwise do it this way. So it just makes life, if statements, programming to what we've got. I still got my old slide in. I thought I'd taken that one out. Delete. I did take one of them out. I must have had two of them in. Nesting. That's one thing that has happened from preprocessors. So instead of... I must admit, I'm not quite sure about this, but it does work quite nicely now. So you can, instead of having to do nesting and then nesting is and then nesting is awesome, you can do nesting and then inside the curly brackets do the is, and inside the curly brackets of the is do the awesome, and basically put all the styles together. It just means that you've got everything closely linked together and closely fit together, which should make it easier to read, should make it easier to change and update and things like that as well. So preprocessors do it that way. So people have been used to doing it that way with SAS and less and all the rest of them, and basically fitting that particular setting in there. Let me do my slideshow from current slide again. Joink. So that's nesting. Colours going crazy. Apple is the big supporters of this, probably because they've got the best monitors out there. So they want to have ridiculous amount of colour variation and ridiculous amount of things. We've gone to the days where you have like, what was it, 256 supported colours within the web. Zillions and zillions and zillions now. And quite a lot of these you can't visually see with the eye, but the one thing they're really good at is doing stuff with gradients and making gradients a lot slicker and smoother and therefore much more HD and much more understanding of there. Do have a look if you're into colour. There's so many different variations of the way you can do a colour code now to go across and what's there. You go like 10 more colour spaces. You're going from RGB to all these wonderful colour spaces that I've never heard of and will never see on a screen in any computer I've got. But Apple, as I say, is incredibly behind it because it allows you to do some really cool stuff on there and has major impact on gradients. I look at some of the examples and go, can't see the difference. But I'm looking at it on a standard monitor, not a 4K, 5K, whatever K monitor that potentially you're looking at these things in. But it does mean you can have some really good colour space to do sorts of things in there. It also means, and again, these are not fully supported yet, but there's some interesting things in there. The colour mix is in SAS, so you can darken or lighter a colour and things like that, or mix colours together in it within the actual CSS. Colour mix is coming to a CSS value near you. Colour contrast, which automatically does the accessibility with contrast, so that it automatically will change the colours to make sure that the foreground and background are contrasting. So you don't need to think about it, which is really cool. That's the relative colour is darker and lighter, and that sort of setting. And you can have colour-based web typography and sort of stuff like that. Again, way above the kind of stuff I tend to do. Little bit, okay. Little bit about media queries, and then I will kind of. We can extend the kind of way we can do media queries. So now you can do media queries like that, not just with the things. So 320 is less than or equal to width is less than or equal to. So in other words, that's between 320 and 1280. But it's in one sentence rather than trying to go minimum width, maximum width, and all that sort of thing. We can also do it with variables. So we can set up a custom media OS dark prefers colour scheme dark, and we can say when OS dark. So we can do that sort of thing. I'm going to flick through these. Prefers colour scheme. So we can set up colours that have for light and for dark, usually variables. And then you can detect and go to the default colour scheme of what you've got. Prefers reduced data. These again for great for mobile. If your battery goes low and your phone automatically says I refers to data, you can change the style of what you've got so that you're not killing the battery anymore or reduced data, you can have smaller images and things like that, and all that sort of stuff in there. So normally you have a big image, whereas if they reduce data, they can do that sort of thing. Prefers contrast. If you've got people who with accessibility issues prefer high contrast, you can change it so it's different contrast and make it even higher contrast to what you do. Great for accessibility features, great for understanding how your users understand what things are. You can even put the hover stuff in a hover, which I think is brilliant. I still had students last week, I will say this on tape, I still had students last week who had in their Figma designs for what they were doing a hover effect on a phone. I went and I put my phone down and go, show me how to hover then. And they went, okay, yes, maybe that was a mistake. Like, kind of in there. It's like, but this allows it to go, okay, if the device can hover, we'll have hover effects. If not, we won't bother with it. We won't try and do it. Prefers reduced motion. Again, accessibility issues with animation, having different animation if they prefer that sort of thing. Stops, potentially seizures and all that sort of area. If you want to test these on a browser, rather than putting it onto a phone and testing them on a phone and changing the settings on the phone, you can emulate them through the rendering. You go to the DevTools, you can add rendering to the DevTools, and you can change what you want and change your rendering settings so that you can emulate particular settings to what you've got. So you can test it in a browser. Always better to test it in a device, but when you're building it first of all. There's loads of others I've put in here. I'll put scroll snap in. Individual transforms and animation make animation smoother and slicker. There is a view transition API. That is JavaScript. That's a nice list of people. Anybody wants these slides, by the way, I'm quite happy to put them somewhere you can get to them. These are people to watch and places to watch that I kind of find, mainly CSS type people, but Rachel Andrew particularly. And I'm going to stop there because we're getting to the end of time. If anyone wants to look at the HTML stuff, they can do. It's mainly kind of bits and pieces, and I've got other bits to do with JavaScript on here as well. I tell it was too long.
We'll bring you back for HTML.
Yes, there's not enough HTML. You can bring me back for HTML and JavaScript.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. Yes, the two together would be the rest of it.
Yeah, we'll bring you back for them.
And I do have a lovely little kind of demo that does everything if people want to. My really bad cat site. The cat site is the bane of everything I do. So this, not only, one thing this does have that I haven't talked about is the manifest. So if you notice here, I have an install app button. If I install my app, it gives me my manifest, which has my nice, looks like a proper mobile thing that tells you what it is, and you can install that to desktop, and that's then now taken out the browser Chrome and put my colours in and everything in. And if that's completely offline with a service worker on top, you don't even need to be on the internet to use it. So basically you can have everything on there, and that will work across, and you get a little icon, like that lovely little icon, my icon there, my cat one that I nicked. And it works on Windows, and it works on your phone, and it'll put it on your desktop and everything. Cool, I'll stop now. Yeah.
Okay, so kind of discuss, because we're running a bit late tonight with obviously getting in and stuff. What we'll do is any questions, pop them on a post-it note and we'll discuss